Welcome to Social Work Shorts, Beers and Ideas podcast, the greatest podcast in the world.
Oh no, it's not.
Oh yes, it is. Do you know what? Do you know we're not going to make it onto the West End, are we at all? With that, I'm not going to ask you to do it again because it's not going to be any better, really, is it? You know what I mean? It was like, there was a complete lack of enthusiasm. Anyway, I think first of all, we should introduce our very special guest for this Christmas edition of the Beers and Ideas podcast, and it's Joe Hanley. Yay!
Yay!
Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Joe, for the public out there who won't know you, although why they wouldn't know you, I've got no idea. You're a mega sensation that you are. Do you want to tell them who you are?
I'm mega sensation Joe Hanley, and I'm a lecturer in social work at the Open University. So I kind of write a lot about networks that influence social work and other professions, and also the networks of kind of resistance that contest them. So we're talking about the Christmas Carol today, right? So
yes,
I feel that there's probably a number of people in social work leader positions in England that kind of desperately need a visit from the ghosts of Christmas to show them the impact that networks have on them, something they don't always seem to understand or want to understand. And I also do research into other things and stuff. But yeah,
brilliant
happy to be here.
You have just upped the professionalism level of the show.
I was thinking that
400%, because that was great. I don't think we've ever hit the dizzy heights of some sort of explanation about who we are. As you managed to there, that's excellent. Now, Jamie, what have you got on your head?
Oh, well, it's Christmas.
Oh, it is. Yes, this is the Christmas special, of course.
And I have a
Got
hat.
your Christmas hat on.
Because I've got, as people who've seen previous episodes are aware, I've got a very thick head of hair under here, and it gets in my eyes. So this keeps it off my eyes. So that's what I'm doing.
Excellent. And me and George have our Christmas beards. Father Christmas beards, and Joe's got his Christmas jumper on.
Yeah, I forgot that you record the video of this as well, and you get it on YouTube and stuff like that. I was just wearing a Christmas jumper for your sake, but
no,
everybody will get to see it.
No, it goes everywhere. It goes viral, Joe. It goes all over the world in many formats. It's absolutely worldwide.
I think we had 6 on the last episode, didn't we?
We had a whole 6 people who listened to it. But this is gonna be brilliant because this concept is just incredible. So there you go. So it's Beers and Ideas. So we've got the ideas already racked up, but we should introduce our beers, I feel. So who would like to go first? George, you go first for a change. I don't think you ever go first.
So I'm drinking a Nothing Comes From Nothing 0.5% IPA. I want to get in there. There we go. And the link I can make to this podcast is, I think this is the cheapest canned beer in South Tyneside. So Scrooge, if he was going to part with any of his money, would pay the 49 pence for these cans, available in home bargains, if there's any left.
What, any home bargains left or cans? Oh, the cans, right, okay.
Yeah.
Got you. Joe.
Yeah,
what are you drinking?
So I'm drinking an Estrella, Spanish beer, which I believe means star, which is in keeping with the Christmas elements of it all, follow the star and all that, which wasn't intentional, I promise. I didn't stand in the shop for 20 minutes trying to find the most Christmas appropriate beer or anything like that. It's a connection I've only just put together now myself, but I'll take it.
That's a quality beer. You are clearly a man of discerning taste.
A man who had whatever beer I could grab. I really don't think I'm that discerning, I promise.
All right, yeah. I avoid that when I've got it in pubs because it's too pricey. Jamie Scott, right. What have you got there?
Well, I have 2 beers. So I've got that one, a neck oil, and I've got a wheat beer. So I've got the wheat beer because I think it's like old English type of stuff, isn't it? Made from hops. I don't know if wheat or hops. I think I probably got that completely wrong. However, it sounds and feels a bit old Englishy, so that's why I went for that. And the neck oil has a direct link. This has a direct link to Charles Dickens, because the neck oil is actually the actual oil of Ebenezer Scrooge's neck.
No way.
When he died and decomposed, the oil that they made when they made this beer. It's a true story, that.
Get away.
Wow.
Well, I have what I think is the most incredible play on words by the good people. The good people of Brewdog. The universal symbol for Brewdog. Joe, it's all right, Joe. Don't worry about it. I'll explain it later. And I have a Brewdog beer, an IPA that's brewed especially for Aldi, and it's called the Old IPA. Look at that, Old IPA. See that?
Oh, wow.
Old IPA.
No, that's clever, isn't it? I mean, some marketing genius. So I know what we'll do. Aldi ends with an I. IPA starts with an I. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to pour it lovingly. So it's the Christmas special. So the other thing that I think would be really interesting for our listeners and viewers, as Joe pointed out, is because we're on YouTube as well. Please give us a follow and a subscribe and a like and all those kind of things. Is what's your favorite Christmas song? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go out all out there, and it's something that's very predictable, and it's Fairy Tale of New York by the Pogues and Kirsty MacColl.
Right. Okay.
I love it.
I see. I think I might put a Spotify playlist together of the tunes that we come up with. I think.
And Joe, what's yours?
In recent years, it's been Christmas rapping. I don't know. I have no idea why it's really got an affinity for me, but it's I mean, obviously there's a great pun because there's like rapping in it.
Yeah.
And it's Christmas rapping. So, but it's not just. I mean, it's obviously not as good as an Old IPA pun, but it's I don't know why, but that's been one that I've been quite interested in recently, and it's been it pops.
And who's that by?
I actually don't know now that I think of it. I can't think of it.
The Waitresses.
The Waitresses. Thank you very much.
Oh, George Stevens is there with his encyclopedic pop music knowledge.
It's probably wrong.
No, it sounds right. It's the problem with Christmas music is like you hear it in Christmas playlists, or you hear it in the radio and stuff like that. And often you're like, unless it's like Wizard, I'm like, I don't really know who sings this, especially modern Christmas songs. That I've heard dozens of times, but I genuinely don't know who they are.
Well, that's because, Joe, of the faceless nature of contemporary pop music.
Oh, definitely.
That's why that is. We don't know who these people are because they're just corporate nonsense. George.
I like one that puts me in a Christmas mood is Sting and Three Ships coming in. I know probably Sting didn't even write that, but I like his version.
There's a link to the Northeast there, George.
Yeah. Well, he used to work on the Shields Ferries, did Sting.
Oh, wow. Did you know? Oh, you had me there. You completely had me for a moment there.
Every time.
You might also.
Do you have a corner reader as well?
It's just because you know so much. Your absolute vat of distilled knowledge that whenever you say something, I just think, well, that must be right because George has just said it,
Well, after the Waitresses, I'll believe anything that George says. So,
it's a contract. It's what you got to show them something before you do the big reveal. Anyway.
Well, my favorite Christmas song, because I'm a musician, so I think
you're a
these
fantastic
things,
musician.
Thank you very much. I think these things through very carefully, and my Christmas song isn't really a Christmas song, but it's the river.
Can I just jump in there? Is it The Darkness Don't Let the Bells End?
No, it's not. That's awful. No, that's dreadful. It's a dreadful song, isn't it?
I love it.
I know.
I quite like it too. Oh my gosh.
I think a double entendre at Christmas time's always needed. So.
Yes. No, my favourite Christmas song is not really a Christmas song, but it's The River by Joni Mitchell.
I don't understand why that's included in Christmas playlists. It is always, but I don't really. Is it just
first line
Christmas time?
No, the first line is, "It's coming on Christmas, they're cutting down trees." It's a bit bleak, but it's Joni Mitchell, so what do you expect? Do you know what I mean?
I think I know it. I probably do.
But if I had to pick a proper Christmas song, it would have to be the Shakin' Stevens one. Do you know what I mean? Wouldn't it? Merry Christmas, everybody. That's him, isn't it? That's brilliant. I mean, Shaky, you know what I mean? Where's he gone? There you go. So, without further ado, we've got the beers. We now just need the ideas. And I floated this idea, I think, didn't I? Did I come up with this idea of doing something with the Christmas Carol, where Scrooge, where social work is in the role of Scrooge? Is that right, George? You explain this better than me.
Yeah. So Scrooge in Christmas Carol is living a life of greed. He's going down the wrong direction, and he's visited by 4 spirits that try to divert his path. So the idea is each showing him a different aspect of his life, future, past, these things. And it'd be a good idea to look at social work from those different angles, see what warnings we can give, or positivity even.
Oh, okay, let's do that. That sounds really good. So we've been cast in roles. Jamie will go last as the ghost of Christmas future. George will go. Ooh, go George. George will go second off last as present. I'm going to be past, and Joe is going to kick us off in this fine festive tale with being Marley. And Marley appears, if I remember right, Marley appears heavy weighted with chains, doesn't he? That's the point of Marley when he appears to Scrooge. So honestly, we have had a go at this, right? I don't know how well it's going to go, but we're going to do this in between each transition. Okay, we're going to do the woo thing. All right, so we're going to go for it. So when we go woo, that's your cue, Joe, to be ready. Okay, so we're going to now take ourselves into the past, into the world of Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol. Ooh, as the ghost of Marley appears to social work. Ooh. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks. I guess I should probably preface everything that I say here by the fact that most of my knowledge about A Christmas Carol comes from A Muppet's Christmas Carol. So, I mean, Marley is 2 people in that film, if you really want to break it down. Yeah, he's the two. He's the two. The 2 guys in the balcony who are always complaining about stuff. Yeah, they play Marley. So I forget. There's 2 Marleys. I always felt bad for Marley because he's kind of like he wasn't offered the chance to change that like Scrooge was, and so I guess like at the end, is he still stuck with his chains around him, even though Scrooge had a chance to be saved? Or maybe he lost some of them because he helped Scrooge. Anyway.
We could be hopeful for that, couldn't we?
Yeah, that's what we'll go with anyway. Hopefully. Anyway, speaking of chains, I guess what we kind of talked about was that a lot of my work is around networks, and I guess there's the interlocking connections between people and organizations like a chain, and I guess they do kind of hang on me like Marley a bit. And like these days, because of my research and work on social work networks, and like I said, these are mostly policy networks, I can't honestly read anything social work these days without immediately trying to think about the networks behind it, like who wrote this, how are they connected to somebody else, and that's kind of almost my default. Before I want to understand that context before I actually read any policy document or any sort of reform efforts or anything like that, which does help, but it also means that sometimes I'm like, I don't read the document itself. I spend too much time looking at who's behind it and all that stuff. But I guess there's other people reading the policies. And I'll talk here for a bit, but cut me off if you want. I can't remember how long Marley talks in the film, but I've written like an article about networks of power and counterpower in social work, and this is beers and ideas. I've listened to you guys before, so you talk about philosophers, and so I'm going to talk about Manuel Castells, who's a Spanish sociologist, and he's still writing today, but like his kind of seminal work on the Network Society was written about the turn of the century. So he sees networks as not just important, but they're the main way that like society is configured these days. And so they're not just kind of an analytical tool. They constitute society today. It's all networks. And he sees like the influence of information technology linking us all together has kind of led to this state that we're in. So a lot of his work is looking at dominant networks. So say in like policy networks and social work in England, I won't name anyone. My work does name specific people, but I won't. There's no point in naming them here.
We lost Joe here, but here he goes again.
So it become almost more about exclusion than inclusion, and those who are not invited to the table, it's more significant than those who are. The cost of not being invited is much more. It's much greater than the benefits of being invited, and by doing this, the network kind of effectively closes itself off to diversity of thought or dissent. And then those who dissent in any significant way, like if you are in the network and then you dissent from that network, then you're kind of cut off from that network. So there's a huge incentive not to dissent. In relation to social work, this means that kind of government invites and policy invites go to the same people at the table, because they know that these people will largely go along with things and not cause too much trouble, which then encourages them to act in that way. And this is also kind of why, or this is how I see it anyway, that like the solutions and the reforms that often come into social work that social workers experience, always they seem quite illogical to social workers, and also like kind of why those in policy circles struggle to understand those who disagree with them, because they're literally living in almost a different logic, different rules, different, Castells calls it different culture from us. And that's not to say that policy networks can't disagree with each other, but they essentially agree on the overall idea that they should be the ones who are in charge. So the network kind of perpetuates itself, and those who support
And here,
the ongoing domination of the network remain included, and those who don't get excluded. And that's not necessarily something that people actively do. It's just something that happens gradually, the network organically, almost, that the network does exclude that, because if this person's not supporting the interests and values of the network, then they fall out of the network. Sorry, I got a bit heavy there. We can
the chains are heavy though. The chains are heavy.
Yeah,
the chains are heavy. Yeah.
They are definitely heavy.
Well, I think there's a few things in that, as you say that I would imagine would pique George's interest, that we could maybe kind of return to after the visitation of the other ghosts, because George has written. I was thinking of one or two articles George has written on social work shorts there that kind of link to that kind of thing, about some of those people that maybe spring to mind in some of those networks. So yes, so Marley is weighed down heavy by these chains, and now social work is visited by the ghost of Christmas past.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't do a great introduction of there, which I think was my main role, and I just landed on. So, by the way, social work is going to be visited by 3 ghosts. Just get right in there.
Do you know what? I bet I can edit that in slickly, or I bet I could just like that for comment.
I'm assuming you're going to edit this whole thing together to make us all look really slick and competent.
Well,
so I'm not.
Probably not, to be fair. So anyway,
have you watched these, Joe?
Because it's all gold. It's all gold. It doesn't matter how slick it is. So I was thinking about where would the ghost of Christmas past go to? And I thought, well, you've got to go back. You've got to go back to the 70s and 80s, haven't you? Really, and you've got to go back to a time when social workers worked generically. They worked with you could be working with children or older people or people with learning disabilities in the same caseload, and no doubt we'll find out about this later on, but that's not the case now. Specialization is the thing. So these dark ages of social work, where whoever came through the door, you dealt with them as a social worker, and then we get a year that's etched in Jamie's mind, because it was the rise of 1979 of Margaret Thatcher. One of his favourite politicians of all time. Thatcher arrives with her neoliberal agenda, and she says, the market must decide. Local authorities had been block purchasing services. And I remember this as a social worker, that we then took those services and identified a deficit in somebody and crowbarred that deficit into some sort of already commissioned service, and we couldn't use anything exciting or interesting because we'd already paid for 50 daycare places or whatever. So we had this kind of this problematic situation where we were being very service led, and not person-led. And then Margaret Thatcher comes along, of course, and says, this society doesn't exist, and all the kind of things that she was talking about. And she said, you bad local authorities being wasteful and wasting money. You really need to be ran like organisations, like businesses. You need to get a business head on your shoulders, and we get this new public management idea, don't we? That local authorities are going to be run like businesses. But the problem is, local authorities aren't businesses; they're local authorities. So we get this problematic kind of shift where local authorities have to commission services from other people that they were doing all right with themselves. So the market will decide becomes the great idea, the great concept. The market will decide, and the market did decide, and the market decided that low quality care was all right. That's what the market decided. Low quality of care was driven down, I would argue. And rather than what we have now, which is not a one size fits all idea, we have a one size fits all kind of idea with timetabled visits, and you can't do something that's not on the care plan. And we even had a time, and I remember this as a social worker, where you could have domestic support unless your daughter lived within 3 miles, not your son, your daughter lived within 3 miles. Then you couldn't have domestic support. The bad old days. But then, let us celebrate. A new thing came on the horizon with personalisation and strengths-based practice. And local authorities found they had a whole new language to continue doing what they were doing, but describing it in a very different way. Did you laugh there, JB? We took this whole language in adult care, just did the same thing, but badged it with new names, I would argue, controversially. And there we have the future of social work, at least in adult care anyway, was about to begin. And I'm told there are similar parallels in children's services. But as the ghost of Christmas past, who was an adult care social worker, I know nothing of that. Therefore, I will not comment. Ooh. And now, we're visited by the ghost of Christmas present.
So, I'm meant to be the jolliest ghost, which the version of the film I watched, very strangely, had Arthur Daly playing young Scrooge. 1951. You can watch it for free. Anyway, so yeah, the jolliest ghost, the one that looks a bit like Santa, is who I'm playing.
Perfect casting.
Yeah. So what I've took out of it is the ghost of Christmas present is what Dickens uses to talk about his views of poverty in England at the time. And one of the great debates, which seems lost in time, was that a lot of politicians believed all the poor houses and bread makers should be closed on the Sabbath for spiritual reasons. And that was more important, observing the Sabbath, than feeding the poor. And this was a massive debate in the country. And Dickens was on the side of feeding people 7 days a week. Imagine that being a radical thought.
Oh, I thought you meant now. I didn't realise you meant in Dickens' time. I thought you meant now.
Well, this is it. This is it. And it got us to thinking: are we in the end times of the welfare state? Have we had a time period that might look on that was pretty good, and we're returning back the past 20, 30 years? Are they going to be seen as fairly good? And are we going to return back to something resembling the times that Dickens was around, referencing the child that died with damp and the slum landlords and these things? I don't want to run away with wild proportions. I mean, how many children are living in circumstances like that? But the number's growing. I was looking at some data. Where the stop benefits, the stop child tax credits for if you had the third child and third and fourth subsequent children, you don't get benefits for. The poverty rate for large families just shooting through the roof. So there are a lot of these things I feel are playing out. And I think as social workers, what does our role become if it's just dealing with the symptoms of poverty? When that's a general thing, when like child protection's always been something as a relatively specialist role of investigating serious harm to children and these things. But if set against that as a generalised malaise of poverty and sort of somewhere towards Victorian slums that Dickens was around about, it's quite worrying. but I suppose it's hard to be optimistic at the moment. And the last bit I'll say, the ghost ages in the book. He gets older, which I'm not sure exactly why, but towards the end he's got 2 children hidden away in his robe, and one's ignorance. So being ignorant of the issues is the route to hell, to sort of disaster for Scrooge. So I think as social workers, we've got to be, poverty can do the them and us thing that we often talk about. It's people that made bad choices and we'll help them make better choices. But I think the more it becomes a systemic thing, I think the social worker's got to be very aware of that and our role within that and what we can do. I think phrases like fighting and stuff like that, you've got to energize. We're professional, can't just be passive in all this. So that's my ghost message.
Okay, so having been visited by Marley's ghost and the ghost of Christmas past and the ghost of Christmas present, we're now visited by the ghost of Christmas future. Jamie.
Wow. I think where I would like to take this kind of links everyone's point together. So we'll talk about Joe's connections, and we'll talk about some of the concerns about poverty that George raised, and also we'll talk a little bit about some of the concerns about capitalism that Stephen raised, and some of the concerns that's happened as a direct result of neoliberalism. So I was thinking when I was asked to come up with something about this, it was is there some kind of optimism for the future? And I think that there has to be, because I think, as George says, we seem to be coming to the end of something, don't we? So I think because we're at the end of something new must begin. And I sometimes feel, I'm in very different circumstances, but I sometimes feel that we're at a very similar place politically when we were when the NHS started, when people are saying we can't have anything radically changed, we can't do anything new, we can't do anything exciting, and because we can't afford it. And yet the NHS was created and achieved some wonderful things and still continues to do so. So I think that's where we are politically. And I'm warmed, even from this government, where they've got people like Jake Rees-Mogg in power. We're still looking at things like trials for universal basic income, which is being tried in the next town from here in Jarrow. So things like that are being considered and tried, even from this government. So I think we'll have to have a look at what's happening with the next government. And I think it's in all likelihood the next government is going to be a Labour government. And we know that Ed Miliband is currently in the shadow government. When my dog's distracting me now. And
the hounds of hell baying at your ankles.
Yeah. And I read his book Go Big, so Stephen can make that appear here.
I can. Yeah, I'll do that.
And he had some fantastic ideas which cuts across political ideologies. And I see some of those ideas, or hints of those ideas, in some of the rhetoric that Labour's coming up with. And I think Keir Starmer talks about moving away from political ideologies, and I think that's probably the direction that we need to go down. So we see things like, like a change in how the House of Lords, I think, is his most recent thing. So I think that's the direction, and I think that's the direction that may be influenced from, I'm going to bring this back to some philosophy here, is from Karl Popper. So Karl Popper, got it in. So Karl Popper talks a lot about how we kind of need to move away from ideologies and to have a look at scientific facts, and how do we look at some research. So how do we kind of make research kind of affect the social policies that we have, and that needs to cut across political ideologies, because I think the old arguments of left and right don't work now. I think we're in a completely different world now, where in Dickens' times, when the left was very, very strong, we had, fighting for workers' rights was very much a simpler argument than what we have now. So I think we kind of need to look across, because we're living in a very, very capitalist dominated world, and fighting for the left argument just isn't going to wash, because we're still living in this world. So I was reading a book by Gabor Mate. Can you make that appear now?
I will do.
The Myth of Normal. And he talks about the impact that we have now on the impact what stress and trauma has on society, on individuals and on society. And and it's huge and it's colossal. So I think what we need to do with hopefully with new political leaders that are coming on board is to look at this. So rather than social looking to fix or help or support or whichever language we use people's problems, I think we need to be looking at driving society to kind of what's that saying you often use, Stephen, is let's stop people being thrown in the river rather than fishing them out.
Desmond Tutu says that we need to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and figure out why they're falling in the first place.
Yeah. So if we look at this book and we look at how people are suffering from the impacts of the current social and economic climate, we realise how huge it is, because people are suffering from trauma and stress, which are having a real impact on the physical and the mental health. So if we're having a society which is more equal and people aren't suffering the impact of trauma and stress as much as they are now, then they won't have the same problems that are bringing us into social work. They also won't have the same problems that are bringing them into hospitals. I think so people's health will improve if we reduce the impacts of trauma and stress. We'll have far less people come through our doors as social workers. So hopefully, politically, if we're kind of redressing the power imbalances and economic imbalances within society, we might start to address some of the trauma and stresses that people are being faced with on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, people may not need social work at the numbers that they do, which the result will be is that, we'll need to see less people, and the people that we do see, we can give much more quality service to.
Social work is saved, I guess.
Absolutely.
That's how it ends, right? Yeah.
Saved.
Yeah. I keep saying when I'm talking to students that the purpose of social work is to eradicate the need for social work. Except at the minute, the purpose of social work is to almost keep fulfilling the need for social work, isn't it? If you think about how we're bought into or influenced, I suppose, in what we do by the political ideology, whereas what we should be doing maybe is taking that more radical social work approach and pushing back against that. But when you're working to pay your mortgage, you don't want to rock the boat, do you? You don't want to rock the boat in the place you're working, because, well, you don't want to be the troublemaker who then gets kind of ostracized and doesn't enjoy working anymore, so kind of leaves and goes to do something else, I suppose. And I'm a big believer that, and I've mentioned this before, I think that we're going through these social work transitions. Almost where we were at with the Ghost of Christmas Past was always almost a kind of childlike kind of social work, just trying to figure out what on earth social work was. And now we're a teenager. Social work's a teenager being rebellious, maybe, or trying to be rebellious and kick against the system. And then we need to come out and be grown up social work. And I think that's kind of something that's certainly kind of resonated with me. We covered loads of ground there. Who wants to chip in with something? That was fabulous.
I'll just say, Jamie, you were far too optimistic. The Ghost of Christmas Future is supposed to be like that cloaked individual in the graveyard and stuff, talking about how terrible everything is. That's
it's not your style, is it, Jamie?
It's not my style at all.
I was watching the news earlier, and it kind of resonates with what Jamie was saying. I was watching the news earlier, and it was about kind of how hospitals. I think it was that more people have been admitted to hospital in this November than any other November since record started. It was something along those lines, and I just thought, the problem, and the problem of caseloads is exactly the problem that you outlined, Jamie, isn't it? It's because the world, this capitalist consumer society we live in, that we often talk about, is making people ill. So the secret is not to have more social workers. The secret is to reduce the caseload by fixing society.
What Gabor Mate talks about in his book, he talks about how we have for physical illness, not just for mental illness, but for physical illnesses, he talks about how what the research is coming back is saying that genes are getting switched on because of the environment that people are living in. So they're not like these genes will inevitably be switched on. Genes that may cause people to have cancers or other illnesses, life-threatening illnesses, they're caused directly because of the environment they're living in. And if you change the environment, those genes may not be switched on. And and it's huge. I mean, the research in that book is just absolutely colossal. The impact that it has, if the conditions that people are living in, is absolutely, it's staggering. It's a book that's kind of really opened my eyes as to how we're seeing this rise in people's health problems as well. So if we're going to address those.
Sorry. This is one of your things, though, George, isn't it? About environment and putting social work into environments, rather than being off in the local authority building somewhere, but being in the environment people are in, or changing people's environment, poverty and that kind of thing. That's your bag, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely. I just think we'll have to be in the communities, because how I see it is similar to Scrooge. There's two Englands. I can make a very good link here, I think, if I can get it on my head. Do you know when I was going about Binnacle and Cleedon, like the difference in age? Charles Dickens used to live for like a week or something in Cleedon, and what's one of those books?
Is that actually true?
Is it Bleak House? One of the books is based on a barmaid in Cleedon, where Jamie cycles to work anyway. So you've got population side by side, where the healthy life expectancy is 20 years different. And it's just so stark. And I guess for Jamie's optimism to work, these people that are living at 90 with 80 years of good health, or 85 years of good health, versus people that start serious ill health at 55 and die at mid-60s, how's that group with the power, the wealth, and the good health, what are they going to have to give up to help those other people? Because they go, well, we'll already pay taxes, we'll already do this, blah, 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 blah. Because I can't see it working unless there's some sort of loss from that side to the others. Either that's political sort of changing allegiances, or some sort of swap over. I don't know, and I think maybe this is a tedious link, but like,
was the same argument not held about the NHS, George?
Oh, entirely.
It can be one, I suppose, is a point.
Well, I hope so. I just think it's just so stark in the moment, and I think it's this othering business, and making a point when Joe was talking, because Joe's work is really good. I encourage anyone to look into it. How if a children's home built in your area, it could be linked all the way to Credit Suisse or some Indian investment fund, or bizarre or powerful forces in capitalism, and just as Scrooge wants his profit, he wants his rent. He doesn't care about the person at the bottom, and I think that's the same. We'll have to have a country that just believes that it's just through good fortune that they live in a better part of town and they're going to live till 90, and the other person's going to die at 63, and it is just. It sounds like it's almost a ridiculous thing to say, but it's just depressingly true, isn't it?
Well, I think there's I don't think people believe it's fortunate. I think there's a genuine belief is that people are, those people who are more well off are genetically better than those people who are less. And evidence could be found in the head of Ofsted, I think it was 2014, he turned around when he was asked, why are people from private education getting better results than people from comprehensive education? And his answer was, don't quote on this, because my wording might be wrong, but the meaning is definitely right, was breeding. And so you've got people in power who actually believe stuff like this. What did Boris Johnson talk about when he talked about to get the best to rise to the top, you shake the cornflake pack and the toy will rise to the top. So it means they put more stress on the population. The best people, will rise to the top. And I think there's a genuine belief in society that the people at the top are the best people in the top because they deserve to be there, because they are genetically more creative, cleverer than those people at the bottom. And I think there's an elitist attitude within this country that needs to change, and I think it'll never change unless we'll have a shift in this government. I mean, I'm not saying all Conservative members have the same view, but I think certainly this government will have today needs to change, and that attitude needs to be eradicated. Really, otherwise we're not going to see any change. Really.
Yeah.
I
Joe,
think
we'll
that,
bring you in. Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say that I think that unfortunately we've perpetuated that in social work. And I say we as if the people in this room have any sort of influence and power to do it. But yeah, just because we've adopted that teach first model of bringing the best and brightest into the profession through Frontline, through Think Ahead, and not just, those started as organization programs that are supporting qualifying, but now they've expanded, especially Frontline has expanded to all sorts of endeavors and we've just adopted that philosophy again, that the best and brightest are first of all, that there's even the concept of the best and brightest is a worthwhile concept, and also, I always find it ironic, and I definitely want to point it out, that the concept of best and brightest was popularized in relation to the Vietnam War. And I think you've all frozen.
Yeah.
You might be able to hear me. But the concept of the best and brightest was popular. Oh, can you still hear me all right?
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, but the best and brightest were these kind of young people who thought they knew best, and then they were semi-responsible for getting America stuck in Vietnam because they were running all these statistical analysis that said, well, we can win for X, Y, and Z reason. So the best and the brightest isn't a good term. It's not something, even at its base. And the idea that that's been allowed to kind of lead social work policy in many ways over the last decade is so crazy. And a real problem with that is that it undermines our ability to challenge that elitism, because if we're basing social work policy and the social work profession is increasingly being based on this kind of idea that there's elite, and they don't use the term best and brightest anymore because of the fact that it's such a ridiculous term, but they still talk about like talented individuals and so that elitism is still there, and the idea that we've allowed that, and I say we again, the royal we as a social profession, to perpetuate. And then how are we supposed to challenge this elitism if the whole profession is theoretically based on the same elitism? The best and brightest can step in and almost save the day. And again, the idea that there is a concept of the best and brightest that can be quantified in any sort of way is just, to me, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that from the students we see come through the universities, don't we? That it's not necessarily the academic high flyers who make the best social workers. The best social workers will come from a range of academic abilities. So yeah, absolutely. There's.
But it's not. I guess it's about that diversity as well. Like you need people who have had, and again, as was being discussed by Jamie and George, you need people who have had the benefit of getting to a place where they have good academic background, So you need people who've experienced that, but then also people who have experience of, more challenging backgrounds that have prevented them from getting to that point, or people who have gotten to that point despite that. And the idea that we're kind of splitting these groups as well is really bad, because we've got now the best and brightest in fast tracks. We've got, mainstream programs, and then we've got actually apprenticeships. If you really want to talk about the splitting of social work education, which is harmful. You want to bring these people together, get everybody to talk. Scrooge didn't, transform or overnight because he was talking to all his friends down at his social club. He transformed overnight because he was, shown other people and shown the experiences and how his actions impacted on other people, and how his ideology or his approach to life was having a negative impact on other people. So if you've got a social work program where, I even saw a tweet from Frontline today where they're still talking about the benefits of having like-minded people in social work, and that was a quote, and I just think, well, no, that's completely missing the point. If social work was made up of all like-minded people, then it would be a pretty, regardless of what background or ideology or whatever they had, then it would be the profession wouldn't be very great with diversity of thought or challenge or so I forget what the original tangent that I started here was, but it's pretty easy to get me to rant about Frontline and the best and brightest. So
yeah,
excellent lingo.
Yeah. I don't know why I've just thought of this, but was this in the Game of Matinee book? I think Jamie, about the two fish swimming past the older fish. So in that book, there's a different book. Me and Jamie, well, we just read the same books. We do it all the time. And I
rings
think
a bell. It rings a
one
bell.
of the problems, I think, is that once people qualify, there's a distinct shift, and it might be wherever they qualify from. It might not necessarily be on down the route. I don't know. I'm just thinking this through as I go. But they become absorbed in a system. And anyway, the analogy goes: these two fish are swimming along. These two young fish are swimming along, and they go past this old sage of a fish. And the old sage of a fish says, "Yeah, morning, fellas. How's the water?" And the two fish just shout morning and swim on. And one of the fishes turns to the other fish and goes, "What's water?" Because they're so absorbed in the system that they don't even realize there's this stuff called water around them. And I think one of the problems with social work is because maybe in universities we don't teach people to be radical enough, or maybe because local authorities can't be radical enough because of ideologies and systems or whatever. But people get absorbed into the system, and then there's no pushing back anywhere goes on in the system. So the system just perpetuates itself, and people just concern themselves with, to go back to last time, with social work as job rather than social work as profession, I suppose. I think we've been talking a while. Do we want some final thoughts?
Good do. George, you go next for final thoughts. You've been quiet today.
I'm just thinking. Final thoughts. I'm just worried about. Well, maybe they're not so worried. I think it's good. I think we're in the end times of the welfare state as it is, and I think some of the ideas were discussed. It needs a rejig, and I think from Marley's changed from all the way from debt and international banking and all these complicated web. That's what needs dismantling, because if we don't get off that treadmill, we'll never get out of it. Like Scrooge lived at the stock market, didn't he? And all this until he increased his lens from profit to people, to the true story that was beneath him. He was never going to change his character, and he had to welcome it in willingly, didn't it? It wasn't. He was in a painful life, wasn't he? He was a miser. It was a painful life. The only time joy came into his life when he realised it was about people. It was about connections. I think he had a cousin, didn't he? Went to Christmas dinner with his cousin. Yeah. That was the joy in his life. The life of avarice was miserable for him. He was miserable. I just think somewhere down the line we're going to have to realise as a country that's we're on a sort of Scrooge path at the moment.
Well, because people think we're starting a conversation again, and we were summarising, but people think they're happy, don't they? But the whole purpose of capitalism is to generate unhappiness, to then sell us more happiness. Yeah. So the happiness is short-lived, isn't it? And that's back to the fish and all that kind of thing as well, isn't it? Yeah.
And it works. If you measure it by profit, or by GDP, it works.
Yeah.
You don't measure by people's happiness. It's not.
Yeah.
Other measures work.
Any other thoughts? Final thought, Joe, maybe.
I'm often quite negative in what I write and what I talk about. So I'll end on a point about hope, I guess, which is something. Yeah, I started talking about Manuel Castells and Network Society, and in his book Networks of Outrage and Hope, which is probably a more, if you wanted to read something that's going to kind of uplift you a bit more than a lot of his work, then that's probably the one to read. It's about networked social movements like Black Lives Matter, Arab Spring, things like that. Occupy Wall Street is another one. And he just kind of highlights the importance of sharing our hope and our outrage and how this can lead to collective action, and kind of what we're doing right now, I guess, because he talks about information technology as being really important. You can blog, you can tweet, you can TikTok your anger or frustration, and also just hope is just so powerful for kind of creating change. So I'll end on that. It's not just about networks of power, dominant networks of power. It's also about networks of hope, and sharing that.
Excellent. That's good. That's wonderful. Yeah. Jamie.
I did have a really good idea, but I got really distracted by the art on Joe's shelves there. I was calling it AT-18 now, the tunes.
Do you know, it's funny, but I was thinking New Hope when he was saying that. I was thinking, we could there could be a Star Wars. We could do some Star Wars kind of thing, couldn't we?
That was an Empire Strikes Back.
I was just going to say Empire Strikes Back. That was the depressing one.
No, hang on, I know my Star Wars. I knew that bit, but when you were talking, it was a New Hope. Absolutely.
I can make it fire, I think.
No, wait, go on. We need to say this.
I just fired one there. Wait, can I? Oops.
This has to happen.
All right. If you zoom in closely there, it did a little pathetic fire and landed flat. So you might need somebody to enhance the video to actually see that.
We haven't got a very big budget for pyrotechnics and such things.
No, that's it. Yeah, you need to do that. You need to make it look like I made it really elaborate. Exploded.
I could possibly do that. I've no idea.
Empire music coming in and stuff like that. I need you to pay for like the copyright rights for the Star Wars music and stuff and add it in. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this.
I'll see what I can do.
So my final thought is there is hope if we're having a Conservative government who's actually having a serious look at something like universal basic credit, because they realise that the current system isn't working. It tells me that people are looking in different directions. People are looking across political ideologies, and hopefully we'll see the end of this struggle between the left and the right, this pull backwards and forwards, and let's look at the system that actually works. Let's look at research. Let's see what works, and let's do it. Now, I think we're heading in the right direction, and the more and more, and the internet has brought greater levels of research and greater levels of understanding that we've never seen before. And I think hopefully policymakers are reading and looking at this stuff, and I know they are because Ed Miliband wrote a book about it. So, and I'm sure other people have as well.
Excellent. You're a liberal, Jamie, really. And I know you don't think you are, but you're a liberal, really. Honestly. I have something to offer, given that it's Christmas. I have something to offer. I have a little indulgence. Put your hat on, because I've got this. I've got this to offer you. Can you hear that?
I can hear it. It's beautiful.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire.
Beautiful.
Jack Frost nipping at your nose. Yuletide carols being sung by a choir, and folks dressed up like Eskimos. Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe help to make the season bright. Tiny tots with their eyes all aglow will find it hard to sleep tonight. They know that Santa's on his way. He's loaded lots of toys and goodies on his sleigh, and every mother's child is gonna spy to see if reindeers really know how to fly.
You do.
And so I'm offering this simple phrase: kids from 1 to 92. Although it's been said many times, many ways, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. Happy Christmas to all the Social Work Shorts, Beers and Ideas followers. We love you all. Have a wonderful time, and don't be a Scrooge.